So folks who are showing up, you have come to the project-based learning room just to make sure that you're in the right spot.
I thought this was positive behavior.
Nope.
Wrong acronym. All right.
This is why I'm telling you. This is why I'm telling you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. No offense, but I'm going to leave.
No, it's fine.
Thanks.
Project-based learning leads to positive behavior. Maybe.
I agree. I actually agree. Behavior issues are not something I usually have in my class. All right, it's 12:35 and we're going to get started. If you're here, we're going to be talking about project-based learning and the ways that project-based learning can be modified, used as inspiration for our current circumstances, especially in the ways of assessment. There's been a lot of talk and stress and angst and, you know, I don't know, nightmares around how are we going to assess students in the current situation when everybody knows they can be taking the test and have their phone at the same time and there's nothing you can do about it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do, what I would like everybody to please do is go down to the bottom of the screen and click where it says participants. And that should give you a list of everybody's name who's here on the top right-hand side. Underneath that list of names, you see it says yes, no, go slower, go faster, and more. If you have ever heard of project-based learning, please click yes. Okay, cool. If you've ever used any project-based learning, please click yes. Awesome. Okay. What I would like to do is I'm going to give you guys access to a website that I put together so that what it does is it's actually going to give you all of the projects that I teach, in addition to some basic information about project-based learning. So I'm going to throw that into the chat right now. And we're going to be referencing that website during this training, but also you'll have it, just bookmark it. It's wide open. You should have access to everything that's in it. On the front page of the website is my email. So if you, I don't know, like a month from now when you finally stop panicking, if you decide, hey, I want to follow up on some of this stuff, you can email me. And if you have questions, just go ahead and bust in. You should be able to unmute yourselves, or you can put it in chat, and Angela's going to be monitoring the chat and she'll be able to let us know if there's questions. Cool? Questions so far? Nope. Okay. So again, you guys are all here for project-based learning, not positive behavior, whatever the L stands for. Okay, cool. Okay. I want to introduce myself. I'm Stacy Newsome-Kerr. I teach at Santa Cruz High School. I'm just a teacher, and I wouldn't consider myself like an extra special tech expert. Tech expert. Text, yes, because all teachers are. But I have been teaching using project-based learning since 2006, and all of my curriculum up to this point has been project-based learning. So using project-based learning, I teach sophomore world history. That's the main thing that I teach. I also teach psychology, sociology. In the past, I've also taught geography and a medieval elective. I think that's about it. And so for all of that stuff, I've put together projects. And the thing about project-based learning that makes it different than just projects is that if you're going all pure like and using a project-based learning curriculum, it means that everything that you're doing is projects, and that all of the extra work that students are engaged in somehow comes back to what they're trying to accomplish in that project. And that's all well and good, but that might not be what we need right now. I love it. And I'll tell you, like I said, I'll show you my projects. I'll show you what I've had students do and what I'm trying to accomplish. And we'll talk a little bit about how you put one together. But I also just want you guys to be inspired by things that we do in project-based learning that you can just pull into a regular curriculum without sitting down and having to conceive of a giant project, because who's got time for that right now, right? We're just trying to figure out how to make things work online. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all. And then I'm just going to be going to the website that I just gave you the link for. And we're going to talk about it. So let's do this. Okay. Can you guys see where I am? Cool, thank you. So the cool thing about project-based learning is it is really at the heart of it something that incorporates technology and being able to collaborate electronically as part of its essence. And since that's what we're all being expected to do right now, it's something that works really, really well with distance learning. In the spring, when the world went completely topsy-turvy and all of us ended up having to scramble for curriculum, I was in the middle of my Imperialism project. I don't know about you guys, but I will remember the exact day for the rest of my life. It was March 13th. It was Friday the 13th. And that was the last day that I saw my students in person. And it was this sort of scramble of like all of the teachers there, we were shell shocked, right? Looking at each other like, what are we going to do now? I know that you know how this feels because it happened to you too, right? And we were like throwing materials at kids because we didn't know when the next time we were going to see them was. And in my case, what I was doing is I was like handing out textbooks, like you get one and you get one and you get a textbook and you get a textbook, because we hadn't actually used them up to that point. And I didn't know if I was going to use them or not, but I wanted them to have something hard copy. And as it turned out, my fear of not being able to have these project-based lessons work only digitally was completely unfounded. And I didn't really need the textbooks that I had like practically chucked at their heads as they were walking out the door. So let me show you. If you go to the website, I've given you a link to all of my project sites. I want to just show you what one of my projects looks like in terms of what the students get. And then what I would like to show you is what I get from the students and how I assess it, okay? The biggest thing, I think the biggest takeaway here is going to be how useful Google Docs is in a distance learning situation, Google Docs and Google Slides, because it allows you to be able to see in real time what students are working on. So you can actually keep up on what they're doing and how they're doing on the project and who's contributing in real time. It's super cool. So what I'm going to show you, like I said, we were in the middle of the Imperialism project when we went home in the spring. The project that I had after that was my Interwar project. And that's the one that I'd like to show you because that's the one that I did. The first one that I had to do, you know, from beginning to end during distance learning. But I encourage you, like dig through these projects. And if there's anything in here that you find cool or inspirational, or you need more information on, email me and let me know. I know that probably most of you are not teaching psychology, sociology, so those might not be as useful, but what might be is you can just see how it's structured, how it's set up, and what kinds of things I'm expecting them to produce by the end. So for the interwar period, what I have them do is create a live radio broadcast. And the thing about project-based learning is you want to start with the end. You want to start with figuring out what it is that you want them to produce and have it be creative if possible. So creative, something that they can use multiple modalities to be able to produce, and something that's collaborative. They can work with each other. And the coolest thing about that is, you know, students are able to contribute to the project what their strengths are. Not everybody has the same strengths. Not everybody's great at writing, but they might be great at editing, or not everybody's great at editing or doesn't want to appear on a camera, but they might be really good at like funny Russian voices. You know, these life skills, funny Russian voices, are things that you might not know or discover about students if you're just doing something more standard, like if everything is writing based. So in project-based learning, writing is incredibly important, but it's not the only thing that we ask them to do. For this project, we actually, I don't know if you recognize the front of this, but it's a scene from the movie Metropolis. And I have the whole project site sort of arranged under a metropolis theme. And we watched some of the movie in the project as well, just kind of for inspiration for them to see, to be able to learn more about Weimar Germany and like really old science fiction. And I'm a history geek, what can I say? So I encourage the use of Google Sites to put together projects. This is old Google Sites. The newer ones are prettier, but I haven't actually moved all of my sites over to new sites yet. Because if you put all of the instructions for something that's bigger, like a project, on a website, and you give them the website, in my case, I post the websites on Google Classroom, then, you know, they have all of these materials in a place where they're organized and it's difficult to lose them. So what I usually do for project-based learning, and again, you don't need to structure it like official project-based learning to have it be cool, but in official project-based learning, we need some sort of hook. You got to hook these students in to the idea of doing something or creating something that's large. And at the beginning, students are often kind of overwhelmed, which is good. You want them to be overwhelmed at the beginning because you're asking them to do something really large. For my projects at Santa Cruz High School, we meet every day in a normal world for an hour and a half. And so we go through each project in 2 weeks. When I taught at New Technology High School in Napa before I came here, it would take us a month. That's how big the projects that I do are. But we're doing the stuff for that project over this 2 weeks or a month while we're doing a bunch of other stuff at the same time. So it's not like we're just hyper focusing on one really kind of obscure and maybe boring thing for 2 weeks. It works together with the things that I'm having them learn. So in the case of the interwar project, obviously we're also learning about the interwar period. I put all of my lecture notes, my PowerPoints on the project sites. They have access to all that stuff. So they can go back and look at it. Last year, what I did, and you know, this is all new to all of us, so it will probably change this year, is I did screencasts of all of my lectures using the Google Slides and then just talking over them. I think this year I'm going to be doing them live. Since I'm teaching actually 3 sections of the same class, that is going to be kind of weird, but I'm doing it, dang it, because I think live instruction is important this year. And you got to have a hook. So in the case of this, what I did is I played for them without telling them anything about it, you know, the famous radio broadcast War of the Worlds. I didn't play the entire thing, but what's really cool is that in the fall, it actually, the day that I introduced this project falls usually like on October 30th, which is the exact time in history that this happened, which I get geeked out on. Anyway, and then we play some of it and then I have them analyze it. This is a text, right? Basically, it's an audio source that tells you a lot from the time period. So you're bringing in these historical thinking skills right from the beginning of the project. What did you hear? What did it sound like? Did you know it was fake, right? Would you believe something like this? How did they structure it so that people believed it? Why did people believe so strongly in radio? I do a lot of media literacy in this class too. And then under further instructions, we then talk about what exactly is it that they're going to need to do. In this project, you'll be traveling back to the past to create a radio broadcast from 1936 to be presented in front of a live audience. You are an American radio crew broadcasting from a foreign country to inform American listeners of what occurred in that country during the period 1919 to 1936. You can move through time, or you can have it all be in 1936 and have it be a retrospective. And then students get to choose what country in groups. And I always set up the groups in advance so that I'll roll out the project and then I'll show them what groups they're in. Having students choose their own groups usually leads to misery and heartache because, you know, the social dynamics, everybody gets their feelings hurt. On, I think, the website that I shared with you, double check this. Yeah, I have a section here of different ways that you can create groups, ideas, and how you can do it. Hold on, going back to this. So giving students choice is one of the best parts of project-based learning. Anytime that you incorporate student choice, it makes them feel empowered that they're actually learning about something that they want to learn about because they chose it, right? So I always give a whole bunch of options that they can focus on for this project. And then I always have on the websites what groups they're in and a links page usually to places that they can go to get more information that I have previously vetted. All this information is being given to them digitally, right? And even when I teach this live in a classroom, I still give them all of this stuff digitally so that they can access it both in the classroom and at home. And so you can see how this would translate pretty well to what we're expected to do right now for distance learning, right? When we did the presentations for this, normally I do live radio broadcasts, meaning like I put everybody in the auditorium and I get microphones and they need to have sound effects and they need to dress up in costumes from the time period. Sometimes I've had groups for this project get together, like I had a live jazz trio last year, you know, and they played during this project. I've had people do dancing, do the Charleston, all of this cool stuff. That's fairly limited while you're in distance learning, but they can still get on a screen and Zoom present the final live radio broadcast, which is what happened in the spring. You still need sound effects. There were some groups that asked, you know, because they were so nervous about doing something over Zoom Live, can we record it and give you a recording of what we did? Sure, be flexible. Yes, you can absolutely record it. Do we have to actually appear in person or can you just hear our voices? Sure, if you want me just to hear your voice, that's fine too. So music from the time period, sound effects, all of these things put together with a script that they had to write. The script had specific instructions of what they had to have in there for content. So you have a writing piece of it. You have the creativity of what it's going to be and what it's going to sound like. You have the students who do really great like Russian accents, and it came together really well. What I want to show you is, let's see, where am I? What it looked like on Google Classroom. So this is my actual Google Classroom for the class I taught last year. I taught World History Intensive, which is basically an honors class, project-based learning. And under classwork here, I had it set up so that all of the lectures, the Interwar Project is a project with a ton of information that I have to get across. And there was a lot of lecture, all of which were screencasts that I did in my backyard with my roosters crowing. That was fun. And here's all the stuff that I gave to them. One of the really cool things that you can do in Google Classroom is when you create an assignment, you can set it up so that you only push out that assignment to certain students in that class that you've chosen. So you don't have to give every student every assignment that you create. This works so well for doing projects or group work. So in this project, I had 5 different groups in the class. I created 5 different Google Docs, labeled the top of each with the members of their group so they all knew who was in the group, because it's not entirely obvious unless they think to go to the share tab. Labeled it with what country they, like, my country is blank, and then the group had to go in and talk about it on the doc. Choose a country, fill that in. That gives me the information of what they're going to be doing. And what's cool, let's see. I want to show you one of the actual docs. It's a lot to view if you're the teacher, but all of this doesn't show up in their Google Classroom because they're only in one group. I also have my groups fill out contracts at the beginning of each project, which is a really good way to establish norms among the students in that group. I'll show you really quick what it looks like. And I think I appended the contract template to the website that I gave you. This is the one that I use. So each of them needs to choose a team role in the group that gives them a certain amount of accountability to something specific. Who's going to be the person who keeps everybody else on task? Who's going to be the person who checks to make sure people did their work? Who's going to be the communicator? Who are you going to assign to be the proofreader? That one is really large, probably should be more than one person. Then all of them are going to take responsibility and put it on the contract for part of the project that they're creating. So for the Interwar Project, you're writing a script. There are 5 specific historical areas that you have to have information for, who's going to be responsible for what. And that gets put on this part of the script. And then there's rules. I have given them some rules in advance. They can add their own to this or modify it in any way they want, giving them the agency over their own group. And hopefully that helps with the communication process at the beginning of a project. And most importantly, as I have a firing policy, that I don't feel like you can do effective group work, especially long-term group work. I mean, these folks are going to be stuck together for 2 weeks trying to do a thing, if you don't have a way for students to hold each other legitimately accountable if somebody isn't doing anything. Because that's the thing, right? That's the thing that everybody hates about group work. That's where all the memes come from. That, you know, you're the one kid in the group who does everything if you are blah, blah, blah. And thus, you know, there's always going to be someone in the meme that does nothing. That's unacceptable from a teaching point of view and obviously from a student point of view as well. If students aren't doing work, they need to be removed from the group and given something that they can do on their own so that they can show you that they've actually mastered the content. Otherwise, group work and frankly, project-based learning isn't functional. So the way that the firing policy is that students together have to come up with what is it going to take to get someone fired from a group? What are the steps? And it has to be very specific. I give them a calendar below that. And ideally, the firing policy is connected to that calendar. So what I encourage them is any of the scaffolding things that happen earlier in the project. So in this case, they had to create timelines of 10 of the most important events that happened in the country that they were representing during the interwar period, and then using those, you know, when they write the actual script. If somebody, by the time of the timeline, hadn't contributed anything, that's a huge red flag. And, and I would say that would be strike one. And I also encourage them in a 2-week project, you don't get any more than 2 strikes. There's not time for 3 strikes. You know, by 3 strikes, you're turning in the rough draft and you're presenting the next day. So the second strike has to be some sort of thing around communication, usually. And in this case, you can see have stuff ready on time is not specific enough. Communicate with group members is pretty important. When a team member is fired, I teach sophomores, and usually they're like, I am not going to be the one to talk to that person. So I don't mind stepping in as the teacher and being like, okay, person, look, here's the evidence. This is what your group told me. We're taking you out of the group and giving you something you can do on your own. And sometimes students really appreciate that, actually, because they felt overwhelmed in the group. The group was not functional for them for some reason. And it gives them an out, right? Without shaming them. And then they sign it at the bottom. That's the contract. What does the script look like? Here's a random script. Let's look at it. Okay. They're doing England in this script. So what usually happens at the beginning of the project, this is their timeline, by the way. And I had it on the same doc so that I could monitor who was doing what when. And you see some communication on the doc, which, you know, when we went to distance learning, because we were not doing any synchronous learning, we were told not to, everything was asynchronous. There was no way for these students to meet with each other within class. I couldn't put them in Zoom breakout rooms or something like that. And so they did most of their communication on a doc, which was only, I would say maybe 60% functional. It worked, but it would have been better if they'd been able to actually chat with each other. And then coming down here, you can see the script itself. The coolest part about Google Docs for group work is if you go up to File, you can look at the version history. And the version history tells you which students have written what and when. So I'm just going to see the version history here. And this will be the, you know, it'll show you the final one. Here, this is the last things that they wrote. So the version history in the current version. And actually, I'm the only one on here, so that's not that exciting. Let's go to this one, April 28th. It shows you the names of the students. It assigns each student a color. And as you go through, You can tell this is near the very end, like they've already finished everything. It will show you what did each of those students contribute. If you go down to the bottom, this is a script that took them a long time. And let's say here, April 19th, they're working on the timeline at this point. So you'd be able to log on as a teacher because you're the one that created the doc. That part's important. Don't ask students to just share it with you. If you're using Google Classroom especially, you as the teacher should be the one that creates the doc, because then you have power to see all the docs, and you know that really, really helps with keeping track of what students are doing and how they're doing. So in this case, you can see which students are doing what and what they're writing and what they're taking out, and it's the coolest freaking thing about Google Docs, and I love it. You have that power in Google Slides as well. So I'm going to jump out of here really quickly and show you an assignment that I did. So the project I did after that is called Survival, and it's about World War II. And what they do for that project is in much smaller groups, they make me a children's book. Usually when I have them in class, I have them read a book, either a memoir or a fictional account of something having to do with civilian experience in World War II. And then they create a children's book for me, inspired by the book that they've read, but not just retelling it, because you have to bring in, you know, historical evidence and research and stuff like that too. And the main thing that I have them think about for that is, how do you explain terrible events to children? You know, by the time we get to the end of world history, it's all just like tragedy after tragedy. Especially when you're doing World War II, it's like civilians, tragedy, Holocaust, tragedy, dropping the bomb, tragedy. And that's right after World War I, tragedy. But I do want them to think about, you know, is this important for children to learn? And the tragic things that happen in history, should they be whitewashed? Should they, you know, be made easier to digest? And I'm not giving them the answer to that. I want them to legitimately think about it themselves. So for this, what I did when we went to distance learning is I made Google slideshows. And when I roll out a project, what I did for distance learning is, normally I stand in front of the class and I show them the website and I talk through the website with them and I take all the questions, and I couldn't do that. We weren't doing anything synchronous. So what I did instead is I recorded myself rolling out the project and I posted it as a video. In any case, what I did is I gave them all a slideshow, just something really basic that they would then fill in. And they were in groups of 2, which is why not everybody turned them in. Again, I love Google Classroom for the visual way that it organizes student work. In this case, I can see what everybody turned in just by eyeballing it. I can see who turned stuff in late, and which was fine with me. You know, stuff was going on. Let's see. I'm just going to randomly choose this children's book. So this group did Japanese internment, and the instructions were basically, you know, you had to do outside research. I gave them links. Create your own illustrations. You can use historical pictures, but you need to change them in some way. Some groups did that better than others, but a collaborative slideshow is such a great idea, and it's basic, right? It's not something that only high school kids will be able to interact with or do. And in this case, they are doing their children's book. They changed the images a little bit, mostly by using a sharpening tool, it looks like. But for this project in the past, I've had students give me just the most amazing things. I have literal like boxes and boxes of these children's books in my classroom, mostly hard copy, obviously, because digital wouldn't be in a box. And then at the end of their book, I had them create an author's note and an illustrator's note where they explained to me why they made the choices that they did in writing their books. Their author's note of why did they choose to represent the story in this way. In this case, they're using verses, and it's based on that book, Brown Bear, what do you see, right? Which, every time I do this project, I read through their books and I cry. Usually I just like close up my classroom and close all the windows and grade them and cry. but I feel it like they're tapping into their childhood self when they do it, and it's so amazing. Look, I'm trying not to cry right now. Anyway, Illustrators Note, same thing for the images. What did they choose and why did they choose it? And the cool thing is just like Google Docs, if you go over to this side and you hit this little icon, which is open in a new window, it'll bring you to the actual like Google Docs, Google Slides interface out of Classroom's grading interface. And you have the same option here. You can look at the version history. So again, you can click on that and you can make sure that everybody who's in that group is contributing and what they're doing and on what kind of timeline. So even if you decide you don't want to do project-based learning, because why would you? You have enough to do this year. Taking some of these ideas about assessment, because that's what this is, right? This is a summative assessment. This was the last large end of project thing that I graded for them. And you can use these types of summative assessments, which are authentic. You can't cheat on this. You know, you're using your own ideas, your own creativity as a student. And that's what makes it pretty cool. So, oops, I'm going to stop sharing my screen with y'all. Hold on here. Maybe. Zoom, come on, don't let me down, man. But I'm curious if any of you guys have any questions. There it is. About any of the stuff that I just went over. I have more that I can share with you, obviously, but I don't want to overwhelm you. I just want to kind of give you an idea that you can play with in the back of your head. And if you have specific circumstances that you would need projects for, because you know you don't happen to teach sophomore world history, gosh, let me know. And I would love to just talk through some of the outcomes that you can do for some other types of classes. It was cool when I talked in Napa, the entire school is project-based learning. So, you know, all of the curriculum for math and science and health and history and English, all of it was project-based, doable. I see one question really quick in the chat about ideas for younger students, first and second graders. I think the shared Google Slides is a really good idea for first and second graders. So that if you assign each student, you put their name on the slide, you have them find the slide, and then you have something that you have them contribute to the slide. And then you can have a slideshow presentation for the entire class. That works really well for elementary school. My kid, who's going to the 6th grade this year, he did that a lot in like 3rd grade, I think. My other kid was in 1st grade last year, and his class did it as well. So that's definitely, but then as you're thinking about outcomes, the fun part of it really, like, you don't just have to assess what they write. You can also assess the creativity that they put into it. And so it becomes more of an authentic assessment than, you know, giving them a test. Not saying that tests don't have their place, they do. They're just going to be really hard this year, right? Any other questions from you guys? Did I overwhelm you? I hope not. No? I should say that in my classes, my summative assessments are the end of project things, but I give them tests at the end too. I do both because I think individual assessment is important as well. What I did last year is, this isn't really a project-based learning thing, but since we are talking about assessment, I set them up with originality reports on Google Classroom. This is super cool function if you have Classroom. Basic Classroom only allows each Google Classroom to run 3 assignments with the originality reports. And it's basically like turnitin.com for Google. And that's all you get is 3. If your district has upgraded to like fancy Google, then you get unlimited originality reports, which frankly is probably worth it. And I'm really hoping my district does this. What you can do then, I set up a separate Google Classroom that I called my testing portal so that I was able to use like 3 of these just on tests. And I told students going in, the questions are going to be open-ended. You're going to have to explain your answers. And I'm running originality reports so that you don't just pull something off Wikipedia and slap it on the page, right? And I think it also works with comparing their work to other students as well in terms of cheating, but I'm not sure about that. In any case, I hope you guys go through my website. I want to show you a couple more things. I'm going to share the screen unless there's questions. I was stopping because I felt like I was talking too much. No? Okay. Just share the screen one more time. And let's see. Part of the issue here is that all of my Zoom functionality is blocking the top here. That's annoying. Okay. Just really quick, looking at these sites, some of the outcomes that I have for different projects. For ancient Greece, we in the past have read the play Antigone, and we have put King Creon on trial for the dastardly crimes of hubris and overstepping his authority. So that's a trial project. Having the trial at the end of the project is something that gets tons of buy-in for students. Not all students, but they really like the idea of going up against another group of students and that there's going to be a clear winner and, you know, somebody's going to win. Students are competitive, man. Whew. I have a second trial project, and that's this atomic bomb trial here. That one is a 1-week project that I run. And what I do for that project is all students are individually assigned a person, an actual person that they need to research who was either affected by the dropping of the bomb, who participated in creating the bomb, or was part of the decision to drop the bomb. And then we have a whole class trial where we call up each student one by one. You're either a lawyer or a witness. And they either have to, so the whole premise of the trial is we're putting the United States on trial for war crimes in front of the International Criminal Court. Not something that would ever happen, to be honest, but it works for the project. So prosecution is the International Criminal Court, bringing the United States. Defense is the United States. That one works really well because it's actually an individual assignment, even though it's part of a project that the whole class participates in. I usually have 36 students in my class. Usually fairly big. We can get through the entire trial in 1 hour-and-a-half period. The Enlightenment, I have them do, it's called 6 Degrees of Separation, and they have to choose 6 Enlightenment documents from the list that I give them, connect them with one another through Enlightenment ideas of popular sovereignty, natural rights, absolutism, and social contract, and make it through 3 revolutions. And they have to present it to the class in the form of a live television show. And they always look at me like I'm nuts when I roll that one out, but it's so fun. It's so fun. You make them do it in a television show. When I first did that project, I just had them connect it in some visual way. It wasn't specific enough, and the presentations were so boring. Television show, and they bring in like all of this interesting popular culture stuff. Things like Hobbes arguing like the Leviathan, right? Arguing with John Locke, 2 treatises of government, using the lightsaber scene of Darth Vader fighting Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they changed the dialogue of the scene to make it represent the dialogue from those documents. I feel like if we were in person, you guys would all be looking at me like I'm crazy right now. That's the Enlightenment. Industrial Revolution is probably my favorite project. It's amazing. The time period's amazing. I'm really interested in it. I'm trying to figure out a way to work that into what I'm doing this year because I'm teaching AP World this year. For the Industrial Revolution, in fact, I'm showing you that one, dang it. What we do is I have them create a pitch book. So like you were gonna pitch a movie idea to a studio. And in that pitch book, again, they have topics. these are the topics. The big thing about the Industrial Revolution is that I want them to see it really through a sociology lens. Disease and sanitation, poverty, what impact did poverty have on society? What were working conditions like? We do that much more than we look at the actual technology of it. Women, like place of women in Victorian society, immigration, what role did immigration have in some of the social pressures that happened in the Industrial Revolution? So they create for me a pitch book where they have to have a 5-page historical background about their topic. I give them chapters from Victorian literature, so they have to write about the author of that chapter. They have to create a location guide, so go out and find all of this cool stuff, like what did the world look like at that time period? And we start thinking about sources in this project as being something that isn't just written. Like pictures are sources, right? Engravings are sources. How do they represent their own world? They have to do a costume guide, and students design clothing for me based on historical models that they find online. The question I always get from students at this point is like, how are we going to sew clothing? I'm like, no, you don't have to sew anything, just draw it. Dang it. And you put all that together, and then they have to make a video for me, like a 3 to 5 minute preview basically of a movie. They have to figure out how to do that. That part would probably be harder under distance learning, but everything else about this project would be totally doable. Just using, never seeing each other. And actually the video, depending on how they did it, parts of it, if they did a documentary at least, would be possible as well. So that's the Industrial Revolution. I think for me, sort of changing up the ways that I expect them to present their knowledge is part of what's important about project-based learning. Imperialism, they write for me a 10-page formal research paper, and they have in a group, not by themselves. I don't want to grade them all by myself if they all did one. And they also have an Imperialism exhibit, which is usually at the public library in downtown Santa Cruz. And they open it up to the public, and people come and they talk about their country, and it's really cool. And someday we'll get to do that again. I'm sort of sad. Last year we never got to. In the spring. World War I, I had debates about the book All Quiet on the Western Front. Interwar period, I already talked to you about World War II, talked to you about the bomb trial. The Cold War is you have to choose, this is actually from these hotspots, because I didn't want the Cold War in a world history class to be just about the Soviet Union. So much more going on in the world than that. And so they have to choose a hotspot, someplace in the world, mostly places where the US has intervened during the Cold War to do regime change. And you have to choose a side. Do you want to be the CIA, or do you want to be, Ho Chi Minh? Who do you want to be? And then you have to do the whole project from that point of view. So it kind of ends the class with this sort of teaching them that point of view is actually a thing in history writing and research and sources. And then they have to write for me a spy report, writing it like it's the time period that this is all happening. So in 1954 Guatemala, you need to be writing that spy report like you are in 1954, and you don't know what the end is actually going to be. And then they have to debrief their leader as the presentation. And again, it's 1954. If you're the US, you're debriefing Eisenhower. If you're Guatemala, you're debriefing Arbenz, which means he hasn't left yet. All of these are available to you. You can go in and look at them. I'm going to stop sharing again. Again, I put the URL to the site in the chat. You guys good? You have questions? Anything? Are you overwhelmed after a whole day of PD? And that's all I got. You can let me know. Again, if you have questions. Yeah.
Great. I think we're just about at time. So we have just a little bit of time before the next session.